Serious, what is the best unexplained mystery? The disappearance of Terrence Williams and Felipe Santos. Two men, unrelated, who didn't know each other, disappeared from Naples, Florida, 3 months apart under the exact same circumstances. Both men were last spotted being arrested by Deputy Steve Calkins for driving without a license. Neither men were taken to jail. They just disappeared. His story is that he dropped both men off at Circle K convenience stores and drove away. There isn't as much evidence to go on with Santos' disappearance, but his story was actively disputed by the available evidence when it comes to Terrence's disappearance. For instance, he had Terrence's car towed and told the tow operator that the car was abandoned. But there were witnesses, who saw him pull over Terrence and arrest him. What did he do with these men? My own theory is that he gave them a starlight ride. In other words, he drove them into the wilderness and dropped them off for them to walk home, and they died of exposure and dehydration. To me, it makes the most sense with the evidence. But maybe he's a serial killer, who knows? A podcaster just used my Reddit posts about the case as the basis for his recent episode. I was pretty psyched. The Voynich Manuscript. A long, detailed, and elaborate field guide describing plants and animals that don't exist in a language or code nobody can crack. Other than an insanely elaborate hoax, I have no explanation. I saw a portion of a TV show on hoaxes a while back where they did a bit on the Voynich Manuscript. Basically, they figure it's a hoax because there aren't enough short words, and worked out a way by which skilled calligraphers could quickly write pages of Voynichese using a large grid filled with Voynichese letters and some blank squares, and a variety of templates with squares cut out. The calligraphers would slap the templates down onto the grid and draw the letters. I believe they also mention that the book also dates back to a time when manuscript hoaxes were extremely popular, and people would pay a lot of money for a one-of-a-kind book. I wish I could remember the title of the show, or even what channel it was on. The Oakville Blobs. Basically, it started raining one day, and citizens noted that the rain wasn't water. It was strange jelly blobs. It happened 6 times in the next 3 weeks, and mass sickness followed. The Stardust Crash and the Meaning of Stendek. A plane flying over the Andes delivered a final coded message, Stendek, minutes before disappearing. The plane was discovered by hikers 50 years later, but the meaning of Stendek still remains a mystery. A theory suggests that the pilot may have been suffering from hypoxia and misspelled descent, but the message was sent 3 times with the same spelling. I did a research project on the crash, and it's surprisingly easily explained, actually. During the time of the crash, navigation was incredibly basic, by which I mean mainly based on timings and compass headings when physical landmarks aren't available. The weather was bad on the day of the crash. The area was treacherous for aircraft to fly in cloud cover because mountains have a nasty habit of revealing themselves too late, so they crew flew at a higher altitude than usual to keep visibility. Jet streams, very strong winds at high altitudes, were virtually unknown at this point due to technology limitations, so as the plane was on course, they were unaware that they were flying into strong headwinds, leading the crew to believe they were making good time and on course when actually they were miles further from the airport than they thought. They then began their descent, straight down into the mountain range, unaware due to the cloud cover. The plane actually crashed on a glacier, the impact of which triggered an avalanche, sealing the wreckage inside the glacier, only to be discovered decades later when it reached the bottom of the glacier and the ice melted around it. Now, Stendek could be interpreted a number of ways. However, the prevailing theory is that it was intended to say Startic, an easy confusion considering N would be and R would be, with Startic meaning standard arrival time, beginning descent. The message also plays further into the theory that the pilots/navigators believed that they were closer to their destination than they actually were due to the headwind. Tara Calico, who disappeared in Sept 1988. A photograph of 2 children emerged in June 1989. It is speculated that the female is Tara. The photograph was discovered in a parking lot by a woman, who claimed there was a Toyota van parked in the spot with a mustached 30-year-old in the vehicle when she went inside the store. The other person in the photograph, a missing male, is speculated as being another missing child, Michael Henley, from New Mexico. Scotland Yard confirmed the female was Tara Calico, but tests of the photo conducted by the FBI came up with inconclusive results. In 2001, they found a woman's body in a little wooded area in the parking of Hospital Royal Victoria in Montreal. They called her Madame Victoria and have never found anything about who she was. They did facial reconstruction. A popular TV show made a sort of documentary about everything they knew to try and find her, but still nothing. How does someone go die in parking in the middle of a city, and not a single person knows who she is? Caso das Máscaras de Chumbo, or the lead masks case. On the afternoon of August 20, 1966, a young man was flying a kite on the Morro do Vitae Hill, in Niterói, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, when he came upon the bodies of two deceased males and reported them to the authorities. The Morro do Vitae had difficult terrain, and the police were unable to reach the bodies until the next day. When a small team of police and firefighters arrived on the scene, they noted the bodies' odd conditions. The two males were lying next to each other, slightly covered by grass. Each wore a formal suit, a lead-eye mask, and a waterproof coat. There were no signs of trauma and no evidence of a struggle in the surrounding area. Next to the bodies, police found an empty water bottle and a packet containing 2 wet towels. A small notebook was also identified, in which were written the cryptic instructions 1630 Estar no local determinado. 1830 Ingrar capsulas, após efeito proteger metais aguardar sinal mascara, 1630 be at the specified location. 1830 ingest capsules, after the effect protect metals await signal mask, copied from Wikipedia. During their last day alive, the two men bought a bottle of water from the bar and kept the receipt so they could return it later. So, they expected to survive whatever they were about to do. The most plausible theory I've heard is that the men were hippie spiritualists who believed they could communicate to aliens or spirits using psychedelics. They must have died of a drug overdose. But what psychedelics cause drug overdoses with no signs of a struggle, and what's with the masks and raincoats? Just weirdness. If anyone has more information, please tell me. In one of my college, ancient Western classes, my professor talked about an ancient Greek civilization that was pretty powerful. Then something happened. There were records by the Greeks of people from beyond their border speaking Barbar, not Greek. They weren't there to conquer or trade but to flee from something. The Greek civilization built a massive, fortified wall on their border. The wall was destroyed. The Greeks gave up a large section of their territory and then built another wall. This wall fell as well, and they retreated again and made another wall, this one almost 3 times as formidable as their first one. This final wall was destroyed. The Greek civilization ceased to exist after that. What is truly strange, however, is that the civilization that was attacking was never mentioned by the Greeks by a name. No describing characteristics about them. At the walls that were built, there were only Greek weapons and armor. There is nothing about the other civilization. This happened before the rise and fall of the Minoans. The Sodder children disappearance, everything about this is just intriguing. I'm from WV and have talked to my grandfather heavily about that case. I'll lay out some things for everyone's benefit. At the time of the fire, most people in power either were coal barons, Italian mobsters, or both. The mob and the coal companies effectively owned everything. The families in that area of the state had very close ties to Benito Mussolini and did not take criticism lightly. They really did control West Virginia at the time, and today their influence can still be felt. It's suspected that the man who tried to sell them life insurance in October 1945 was really selling protection. The father of the family openly criticized Mussolini and was against him as a leader for the Italian people. It's suspected that the man who inspected and rewired the house was a mob man, and he planted an incendiary device in the attic. On the night of the fire, it's thought that the mob man was waiting outside listening for the phone to ring. He then waited for the mother to go back to bed and slipped into the barn where they were finishing up their last chores for the night and took the children away. It's thought that of the missing children, one of them did die in the fire. They found bone fragments of vertebrae younger than 24 in an excavation, but the others went with the man. He then activated the incendiary device and left with the children. The father's vehicles were sabotaged, the ladder was gone. It was later found thrown down an embankment some distance away. Their Christmas lights stayed on even though they should have gone out if it was an electrical fire, and the phone line was cut. There was also a man arrested for stealing a block and tackle from the house just before the start of the fire. He denied any involvement in the fire itself, but said that he cut the phone line thinking it was the power line, so they couldn't see him in the yard. The mother later said that if the power had been cut, they wouldn't have been able to see to get out, and it would have killed them all. Luckily for that man, he was let go shortly after, and his file disappeared. A woman reported seeing 4 of the children with an older Italian man at a hotel, and they appeared to be coerced into following him. One of the children, Louis, supposedly popped up in Texas in the 60s when he got drunk and started talking about it. One of the girls supposedly popped up in NYC in the early 50s doing ballet. The other 2 are said to have popped up in Sicily in the early 60s. One working as a prostitute at a mob house and the other visiting her. Overall, the general conclusion of those around here, who aren't connected to the Italian mob, is that the mob wanted to kill the entire family for being anti-Mussolini, but a wrench was thrown in their plans when the 4 kids were in the barn. One child did die in the fire, but the other 4 were taken by the mob. The mobs had such control over the government in WV that it was hushed up. Devil's Kettle. It's a waterfall in northern Minnesota where one half of the waterfall falls into a hole in the rocks and is never seen again. Local geologists have thrown stuff down there and nothing is ever seen again. When you consider the types of rocks in the area, it's even more confusing. The death of Gareth Williams really unnerves me for some reason. He was a mathematician who worked for MI6 and went missing in about 2010. When they investigated his apartment, they found a gym bag in the bath, padlocked shut, and his body was curled up inside. There was no evidence that anyone else had been inside the house, and on his computer history, there was a bunch of fetish stuff about being locked in small spaces, but they got a bunch of people to try and lock themselves in a bag. Some people tried hundreds of times, and even if they could get the bag closed, none of them could lock it. Nobody knows whether his death was an accident or murder. Stonehenge. Even with today's technology, we can't say for sure how, why, or who built it. For something over 5,000 years old to hold on to its exact meaning after all this time, makes it one of the great unexplained mysteries. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Long story short, he was driving down a road in Minnesota in 2008 and came off into a ditch. He phoned his father to ask him to pick him up and told him where he was, and his father said he would pick him up at a nearby town called Lind and that Brandon should walk there and meet him. As his parents were on the way to pick him up, they were on the phone with him. They were unable to see him initially, so they asked him to flash his car's lights. Nothing. He said he could see the lights of a nearby town and would walk towards them. His father dropped his mother back at home and went back out to find him. At around 2 a.m., after around 47 minutes on the phone, Brandon yelled, "Oh shit," and the phone hung up. That was the last anyone ever heard from him. His car was found near Taunton, Minnesota, around 20 miles from where he said he was. His phone was never recovered. No trace of him has ever been found. No one knows what the lights he saw were, why he yelled "oh shit," why he was 20 miles from where he said he was, where he went or where he is. The Bobby Dunbar case. In 1912 a 4-year-old disappeared while his family was camping. After a frantic 8-month search, a child matching his description was found one state over in the company of a traveling tinkerer. This little boy recognized Mr. and Mrs. Dunbar as his parents and seemed to know details of Bobby Dunbar's life. The tinkerer insisted that the child was actually Bruce Anderson, whose mother, a single, illiterate, poor servant, had given him custody because she couldn't afford to raise Bruce. Julia Anderson traveled to Louisiana to support his story and identified the little boy as Bruce. However, the courts believed the Dunbars instead and convicted the tinkerer of kidnapping. He later won an appeal, but the Dunbars retained custody of Bobby. 90 years later, Bobby's granddaughter was doing a genealogy project and discovered the old controversy. She had her father and her uncle, son of the younger subset brother, take a DNA test. The test proved that Bobby Dunbar was not related to the Dunbar family. He was Bruce Anderson all along. So, what happened to Bobby? The disappearance of Agatha Christie. One of the great, if not the greatest, mystery writers of all time, and one day, for no reason, she vanished without a trace. And then she was found 10 days later, suffering from amnesia, but registered at a hotel under the name of her husband's mistress. No explanation has ever been offered by Agatha. I haven't seen mention of this, the disappearance of Pennsylvania District Attorney Ray Gricker in 2005. Gricker had previously investigated misconduct charges against Penn State football assistant coach Jerry Sandusky in 1998. Gricker didn't have enough evidence at the time to press formal charges and dropped the case. In 2005 he went missing, and his car was discovered in the parking lot of a roadside business north of State College, Pennsylvania. His laptop was found in a nearby stream with the hard drive removed. In 2011, after a lengthy grand jury investigation, Sandusky was finally charged. Gricker's body was never found, and officials deny any connection of the Sandusky Penn State abuse scandal with Gricker's disappearance. The one that still holds my thoughts to this day is the disappearance of Kyron Horman. 7-year-old Kyron allegedly went missing from his school one morning after his stepmother went in to see his science fair project, and was last seen by her walking down the hall to his first class. He never made it. The trail runs pretty cold after that. The stepmother was suspected after it was found that she had made phone calls to a random island off the coast that day, but nothing ever proved itself of valuable evidence. Eventually, it was revealed that the stepmother had asked the family's landscaper to kill her husband months before Kyron's disappearance. The landscaper was asked to wear a wire when speaking to her about it, but nothing came up. The father and stepmother divorced, and he has a restraining order on her. The Alien Moore Lighthouse Mystery. On December 26, 1900, a supply ship arrived at the Alien Moore Lighthouse to find that no one was at the dock waiting for them. The island's only inhabitants were the lighthouse keepers James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and William MacArthur. Captain James Harvey was in charge of the supply ship and had brought along Joseph Moore, a replacement lighthouse keeper. After attempts at getting the lighthouse keepers using the ship's horn and a flare, Joseph decided to go up to the lighthouse to check things out. When he reached the lighthouse, he immediately knew something was wrong because the door was unlocked, and 2 of the 3 coats were missing in the entrance hall. As he reached the kitchen, he noticed a half-eaten meal and an overturned chair as if someone had left in a hurry. After searching the lighthouse top to bottom, Joseph hadn't found signs of the lighthouse keepers. A further investigation was made and found mysterious entries in the lighthouse log. December 12, Thomas Marshall noted of severe winds the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He also noted that James Duckett, the principal keeper, had been very quiet and that William MacArthur had been crying. The strange thing is that on the mainland, MacArthur had been known as a tough guy and was a seasoned mariner. December 13 noted that the storm was still raging on and that the 3 men had been praying. It's strange because all 3 of the men were seasoned mariners and situated about 150 feet, 45.72 meters, above sea level. They should have known they'd be safe, so why would they be praying for the storm to pass over? The final log entry on December 15 read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." The strange thing is that there were no reported storms in the area on the 12th, 13th, and 14th of December. In fact, the weather in that area had been reported as calm. The most accepted theory is that the men were swept into the sea and drowned. However, questions arose about why the bodies had never washed up on shore as well as some others. The Vanishing Triangle. During the late 90s, 8 young women in Ireland disappeared without a trace. No bodies were ever found, no substantial evidence to link anyone to the disappearances, no clues as to what happened to the women, and all within an, admittedly very broad, area the media started calling the Vanishing Triangle. One of the women disappeared in broad daylight, and another just outside her parents' house. While the cases aren't officially linked, the popular theory is that there was a serial killer/kidnapper. A man named Larry Murphy, who was arrested in 2000 for attempted murder, is a popular suspect, but he's always denied it, and there's no real evidence to link him to the other cases. Also, the assassination of Juvenal Habyarimana and Cyprian Terriamira doesn't usually come up on these lists of unsolved mysteries, but there has never been enough evidence to point to any one group in particular. The assassination kicked off the Rwandan genocide. The main suspects are Hutu extremists, who went on to carry out the genocide, and Paul Kagame, who became the president of Rwanda after the assassination. There's also evidence that members of the French military working with the Rwandan Presidential Guard were involved. And, because I haven't seen it mentioned yet, how the stone spheres of Costa Rica were made. I haven't seen this mentioned yet, but Ricky McCormick, a man who reportedly could barely write his own name, was found dead, with notes in his pocket resembling a code. Cryptologists have been trying to decipher the code for several years. The FBI eventually released the notes to the public, asking for assistance in the hope someone might recognize the code or be able to crack it. Some have speculated that it's about drugs, some that it's his medication list, and many presume it's nothing more than gibberish. It still raises the question, who killed Ricky? What do the notes contain, if anything at all? Why do people tend to die with mysterious ciphers in their pockets? I've often thought about this case and looked over the notes several times. There are repeating letters such as FERN, WLD, and PRSE that lead me to believe that there really is a message in them.